Outside the Midnight Haven diner, the world had turned into a furious, howling white monster. The wind didn't just blow, it screamed against the old windows, making the glass rattle in its frames like it was begging to be let in. Each gust shook the entire building, a lonely little box of light, fighting a losing battle against the Colorado mountain storm. Inside, the air was almost as cold. Sarah Williams stood behind the counter, her shoulders slumped with a weight that had nothing to do with age. In her worn, tired hands, she held her future. It was a small, sad stack of crumpled bills and a few coins. She smoothed a $5 bill against the counter and added it to the pile. Then she counted. Again. $47, she whispered to the empty room. The words hung in the chilly air, sounding even smaller than the number. That was it. That was all that stood between her and the end. Beneath the cash register, hidden from view but burning in her mind, was the official-looking letter. The paper felt cold and cruel. The bank's words were simple and final. Pay everything you owe in 7 days, or we take it all. Her diner, her home, every memory of her late husband Robert, and the dream they had built together within these 4 walls. It would all be gone, repossessed by a bank that didn't care about dreams. She looked around at the empty red vinyl booths, their seats cracked and splitting. She listened to the lonely, weak gurgle of the coffee machine and the tired groan of the heater fighting a war it couldn't win. The fluorescent lights above flickered, threatening to plunge her into darkness at any moment. It felt like a sign. A deep sadness washed over her. This was it. The fight was over. With a heavy heart, she decided to finally surrender. She would flip the open sign to closed for the last time, turn off the lights, and let the storm win. Her hand reached slowly for the light switch, her fingers trembling. Just as she was about to plunge the diner into darkness, she froze. She heard something else. It wasn't the shrieking wind or the creaking building. This was different. A low, deep, and powerful rumble that cut through the storm's noise. It vibrated through the floor and up into her bones. It sounded like thunder, but it was steadier, stronger, and it was getting closer. Sarah's breath fogged the cold glass as she pressed her face to the window, trying to see through the swirling wall of white. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The rumble wasn't thunder. It was deeper, meaner. It was the sound of engines. Then she saw them. Ghostly shapes emerged from the storm, materializing like giants in the blizzard. One after another, massive motorcycles rolled into her deserted parking lot, their headlights cutting twin beams through the furious snow. They kept coming. Not 2, not 5, but 15 gleaming, snow-caked machines. Her blood ran cold. The riders were huge, wrapped in layers of black leather and frozen denim. They were caked in ice, looking more like snow monsters than men. And on their backs, clear even through the storm, was a patch that made her mouth go dry, a winged skull. These weren't just bikers. They were Hell's Angels, America's most famous and feared motorcycle club. They moved with a dangerous confidence, even exhausted. The leader, a giant of a man with a face weathered by a lifetime of hard roads, dismounted stiffly. He moved toward her door, his boots crunching heavily in the deep snow. Every instinct in Sarah's body screamed at her to turn off the lights, lock the door, and hide. He knocked. Not a loud bang, but 3 solid, respectful raps. Trembling, Sarah cracked the door open, a blast of freezing wind and snow whipping inside. The man stood there, ice clinging to his beard. Up close, he looked even bigger, but his pale blue eyes held no threat, only a deep, bone-tired exhaustion. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, worn raw from the cold and maybe too many cigarettes. "I'm Jake. The highway's shut down completely. We've been riding in this for hours. We're ice cubes. We've got cash. We're not looking for trouble. We just need to get warm." Sarah's eyes darted from his tired face to the group of hardened men behind him, shivering in the freezing cold. They looked dangerous. They looked like trouble. But underneath the leather and the scary patches, they also looked frozen, miserable, and human. She thought of her husband Robert. A light for travelers, baby. A home away from home. Her fear didn't vanish, but it was met by something stronger. A stubborn, kind heart. Without another thought, she swung the door wide open, letting the freezing air rush in. "Get in here," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "All of you, get in before you freeze solid." The second the bikers stepped inside, the small diner seemed to shrink. 15 large men in heavy, wet leather jackets filled the space, their broad shoulders making the red vinyl booths look like toys. The floor was quickly covered in melting snow as they stomped their boots clean. The air, once cold and still, was now thick with the smell of wet leather, cold metal, and the sharp chill of the outdoors. They looked like a pack of wolves in a sheep pen, tough, tattooed, and intimidating. But their actions were gentle. They moved carefully, trying not to bump the tables or chairs. "Thank you, ma'am," and "We appreciate this," rumbled through the group in low, grateful voices. The youngest one, a skinny kid with nervous eyes, even took off his muddy boots by the door. Sarah's mind raced. Her eyes flicked to her nearly empty kitchen. The fridge was almost bare. She had a few cans of soup, the last of yesterday's bread, and a pot of old coffee she'd been saving for herself. It was all she had to last the week. But she looked at them, really looked at them. She saw how their frozen hands struggled to unzip jackets, how they cupped their hands and blew into them, trying to bring back feeling. She couldn't let them stay hungry. Without a word, she got to work. She fired up the stove, poured all the soup into her biggest pot, and added extra water to make it stretch. She warmed the bread and sliced it. She put on a fresh pot of coffee, using the last of her grounds. Soon, the diner was filled with a new, wonderful sound, the quiet chatter of men and the comforting smell of hot food. She served them the simple meal, bowl by bowl. Their gratitude was instant. "This is amazing, thank you," one said. Another offered to pay, holding out a crumpled bill. Sarah shook her head, a sad but warm smile on her face. "It's on the house." That's when Jake, the leader, noticed it. As she waved away the money, her movement dislodged a piece of paper hidden under the register. It was the official bank letter, and the bold word "foreclosure" was clearly visible. He waited until the others were busy eating before he approached the counter, his voice low and kind. "How bad is it?" he asked, nodding toward the letter. The kindness in his voice broke her. The truth tumbled out. "The bank, they're taking it all. The diner, my home, everything. I have 7 days left. I've lost it all." Jake was silent for a long moment. He looked around the warm, steamy diner, at his men eating gratefully, and then back at Sarah, who had just given them her last scraps of food. His expression changed from gratitude to something harder, like solid steel. He leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "Listen to me," he said. "You had nothing. You were scared. But you opened your door to us anyway. You gave us your last meal." He looked her straight in the eye. "That wasn't just soup. That was an act of courage. And that means your problem isn't just yours anymore. It's ours now, too." Outside, the storm continued its furious attack. But inside the midnight haven, a warm, quiet hum had settled over the room. The bikers, now full and warm, were sipping coffee and talking in low voices. The scary-looking man with intricate tattoos on his arms, named Marcus, had been staring at Sarah for a while. Suddenly, he snapped his fingers, the sound sharp in the cozy diner. "Hey, I know you," he said, his eyes widening. "You're her!" Everyone went quiet, turning to look. Sarah froze, a clean mug in her hand. Marcus stood up, getting excited. "Tommy Patterson, my brother-in-law. About 10 years back, he had a massive heart attack right out in your parking lot. You found him, called an ambulance, and when it couldn't get through, you drove him to the hospital yourself in this very storm. You sat with him all night. He says you're the reason he's alive today." The story seemed to flip a switch in the room. Another biker, Carlos, a quiet man with a gentle face, looked up. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice soft with memory. "5 years ago, my little girl was in a bad wreck in Denver. I was lost, panicking. I stopped here. You let me use your phone for free. You gave me directions, a map you drew yourself, and a cup of coffee for the road. You were so calm. You helped me get to her." Then the youngest biker, Danny, who had been quiet all night, cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. He looked down at his hands. "3 years ago," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I was in a real bad place. I had nowhere to go, no money, no hope." He looked up at Sarah, his eyes shining. "I stopped here because my bike was sputtering. I ordered coffee, but you brought me a full meal, a burger, fries, pie. When I told you I couldn't pay, you just smiled and said it was on the house." He swallowed hard, the memory raw. "You talked to me. You told me it was okay to be lost. Then you gave me a name, a number, a guy in Salt Lake City who gave me a job and a second chance." He looked around the room at his brothers. "Ma'am, you didn't just feed me that night. You saved my life." One by one, more stories tumbled out. A fixed bike here, a tank of gas there, a warm word on a cold night. Sarah stood behind the counter, utterly stunned. She had forgotten most of these moments. To her, they were just small acts of kindness, things anyone would do. But to these tough, hardened men, they were lifelines. They were miracles. They were the reason they had made it home. The fear she had felt earlier melted away completely, replaced by a swelling in her chest. She wasn't just a struggling diner owner anymore. She was the guardian angel of Highway 70, and her family had just come home. Jake listened to the stories swirling around the warm diner, his face a mask of quiet thought. He watched Sarah, this woman who had given everything she had to strangers for 15 years, now facing ruin. He saw the way his men looked at her, not with fear, but with deep, unwavering respect. Suddenly, he pushed back from the table, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. The conversation stopped. All eyes turned to their leader. "This isn't right," he said, his low voice cutting through the hum of the heater. He looked straight at Sarah. "For 15 years, you've been a lighthouse on this highway, a beacon of hope for every lost soul caught in the dark. You've been our light." He pounded a fist gently on the table, not in anger, but with determination. "Now it's our turn to be the light for you." Without another word, he zipped up his frozen jacket, pulled his hood up, and marched to the door. He yanked it open, letting in a blast of icy wind and snow, and stepped out into the furious storm. The diner fell silent. Everyone listened. They could barely see him through the window, a dark shape pacing in the whiteout, a phone glowing against his ear. His breath came out in great clouds as he talked, his gestures sharp and clear even through the blur of snow. He wasn't asking, he was calling in a debt. He was rallying an army. Minutes felt like hours. When the door finally burst open again, Jake stood there, covered in a fresh layer of snow, his beard frozen stiff. But his eyes were blazing with a fierce light. A slow, confident smile spread across his face. "Help," he announced to the silent waiting room, "is on the way." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a new sound joined the howling wind. Not the deep rumble of motorcycles, but the steady growl of truck engines and the hum of cars. New headlights, dozens of them, pierced the stormy curtain, lighting up the parking lot like a surprise sunrise. Tires crunched through the deep snow. The diner door flew open, and there, covered in snow and with a face full of fiery red beard, stood the trucker from the stories. Tommy Patterson. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Sarah. "Sarah Williams!" he boomed, his voice full of emotion. He crossed the diner in 2 big strides and wrapped her in a bear hug so powerful it lifted her off the ground. "I heard you were in trouble. The word's out." The Bikers Network had done its work. The call had gone out from Jake, racing through phone lines and radios. "The angel of Highway 70 needs us." And from all directions, through the impossible storm, the people whose lives she had touched were coming. They were coming to return the favor. The cavalry had arrived. The howling wind had finally died down, replaced by an eerie, beautiful silence. The sun began to rise, painting the fresh, deep snow with the soft pink and gold light. Sarah, who had barely slept, moved to the big diner window to look out at the new day. Her hand flew to her mouth. A gasp escaped her lips. She couldn't believe her eyes. The world outside had been completely transformed. Her parking lot, her empty field, the stretch of road she could see, every single inch was covered with motorcycles. Not dozens, hundreds. They were parked in perfect, gleaming rows, their chrome handlebars and engines glittering like diamonds in the morning sun. The snow had been trampled down by a legion of boots. These weren't just the 15 men from last night. These were Hell's Angels from everywhere. She saw patches from Oakland, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, Denver. They had ridden through the worst of the storm, through the night, to answer Jake's call. They had all heard the same message on their radios and phones. "The angel of Highway 70 needs us. Rally at the diner." The diner was now packed with these tough, leather-clad men, all talking quietly, drinking coffee, and looking at Sarah with a respect that made her blush. Jake walked through the crowd, which parted for him like a sea. In his hand was a thick, brown envelope. He stopped in front of Sarah and held it out. "This is for you," he said, his voice gentle. With trembling fingers, Sarah took it. It was heavy. She undid the clasp and peeked inside. Her knees went weak. It was crammed full of cash, bills of all denominations, bundled together with rubber bands. "It's $68,000, Jake said, calmly. "From every chapter here. This will pay your bank debt and then some." Sarah stared at the fortune in her hands. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the vision of the money. This was more than just money. It was her life, her future, handed back to her. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This is too much. I can't accept this." Before Jake could answer, another man stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man, even bigger than Jake, with Oakland etched on his cut. His arms were covered with tattoos, but his eyes were kind. "Yes, you can, and you will," he said, his voice a low rumble that brooked no argument. He looked around the crowded diner, and then back at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "But this gift, it comes with a few conditions."
A wave of nervousness washed over Sarah. Conditions? What could they possibly want? The giant from Oakland saw the worry flash across her face, and his expression softened into a warm grin. "Don't you fret," he said. "These are the good kind of conditions." He began to count them off on his thick fingers. "Condition number 1, he announced. "You can never close this diner. This place is sacred ground now. It stays open. Forever." Sarah's eyes widened. "Condition number 2, Jake continued, stepping forward. He pulled out a rolled-up paper from his jacket and spread it on the counter. It was a drawing, a plan for the diner, but it was bigger, better. "We're expanding. We're building a brand new addition, a proper lounge for bikers to relax, with strong coffee, good music, and comfortable chairs. And we're paving a huge new parking lot just for motorcycles, enough for everyone." Sarah looked at the plans, her dream evolving right before her eyes. "Condition number 3, said the man from Oakland. "From this day forward, the Midnight Haven isn't just a diner. It's the official rest stop for every Hell's Angel riding through the West. You'll have more business than you know what to do with." Then Jake's face grew serious. He leaned in close. "And the most important condition of all, you, Sarah Williams, and this diner are now under the permanent protection of the Hell's Angels. Anyone who even looks at this place the wrong way will have to answer to every one of us. No one will ever trouble you again. You're family now." Just then, a sound that had been silent for years cut through the buzz of conversation. The CB radio on the counter crackled and sparked to life. "Breaker 19, Breaker 19, this is Road Dog calling for the Angel. You copy?" A hush fell over the room. Every head turned. Sarah, her heart swelling with a joy she hadn't felt in years, walked over and picked up the microphone. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear, strong, and filled with happiness. "Go ahead, Road Dog. This is the Angel. I read you loud and clear." "Angel, we heard the call. Utah chapter's rolling your way, 40 bikes strong. ETA 30 minutes. How's our Angel doing?" A huge cheer erupted from the packed diner. Sarah laughed, tears of happiness now streaming down her face. She keyed the mic again, her message going out over the airwaves to every listening soul on the highway. "The light is on, the coffee is hot, and the road is always open for family. Come on home."
Come on home. Months flew by, and the transformation was nothing short of a miracle. The Midnight Haven Biker Haven was now the most famous stop on Highway 70. It was even featured in magazines, with photos of gleaming bikes parked in rows that seemed to stretch on forever. Travelers and bikers from every corner of the country made it a point to stop. They came for the famous homemade pie and the strong, bottomless coffee, but mostly they came to meet the legend herself, Sarah, the Angel of Highway 70. The lonely silence was a distant memory. Now, the diner hummed with constant life. The air was always filled with the deep, friendly rumble of motorcycle engines, the clinking of coffee mugs, and the sound of easy laughter and shared stories from the road. Sarah was never alone. She had a constant stream of visitors, a huge leather-clad family who checked in on her, helped with repairs, and ensured she always had what she needed. On the counter, right next to the old cash register, sat a framed photo of her husband, Robert. Sometimes, when she looked at his smiling face, she could almost hear his voice, warm and proud, whispering in her ear, "I told you, baby. I told you this place would be special." Their dream hadn't just been saved from the bank. It had been reborn, bigger, brighter, and more wonderful than they had ever dared to imagine. The light in the window, the beacon on the highway, burned brighter than ever, and everyone knew it would never, ever go out again.